So in order to get this animation started, it's a pretty procedural thing, at least to get it started. And then it's going to take a little bit of experimentation, a little bit of creativity to add a lot of character to this. But what I'm going to focus on first are just kind of the primary motion, okay? And the primary motion are going to be the rotation of the upper legs and the rotation of the upper arms, okay? So in this animation, as I mentioned before, we're focusing on only 30 frames of time. Now, this whole animation is going to be split right in half. And what I mean by that is that this is going to be an animation loop or a cycling animation. And the sort of 10-cent definition of a cycling or a looping animation is that the first frame is the same as the last frame. So the position of the arms and the legs should be the same in the first frame and the last frame, or the first keyframe and the last keyframe. And what that means is that our alternate position, in this case, will fall roughly halfway through time. So to demonstrate this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that my playhead is at the first frame. Now, I did not introduce any keyframes, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to forget about the upper body for a moment. I'm going to focus on the lower body. I'm going to find the one of the upper legs. I'll start with the one that's closest in the foreground. In that case, it's the right upper leg. Now, if I were to, I need to record this position in time. And if I don't add a keyframe to the beginning of time and I advance my playhead and then I record the next position, that's going to determine the starting position of my animation. So in other words, what I mean is that I want this object to start at this point in time. The basic principle of animation in Cinema 4D is that if I break up this sequence and I record the keyframe and I scrub the playhead back to the beginning of time, that now established its starting position. So what I need to do is make sure that my playhead is at the beginning of time, and I want to add the keyframe. I'm going to focus on one leg at a time at this point, and so I'll advance the playhead halfway through time, so 30 frames, 15 would be roughly halfway through time. I'm going to shift click and I'm going to rotate. Now, if I rotate 30 degrees, I'm back in the upright position, the standing position. So if I rotate another 35 degrees, it'll be a total of 70 degrees. I'll release that. This is the back position, and so I'll record that keyframe. I'll advance the playhead, and I'll rotate this back to the original starting position, and I'll record that keyframe. Now when I scrub the playhead, I get this basic motion. Okay, so it starts, moves back, and then moves back to the beginning. Okay, so the first frame and the last frame are in the exact same position. Now I'll go and do the opposite leg. So I have the opposite leg selected, my playhead's at the beginning of time. I'll record the first keyframe. I'll advance the playhead to frame 15. And I'll rotate this 70 degrees now, because it's based on 35 was from the standing position. We rotated 35 forward and 35 backwards. If you add those two values together, it's 70. That's how I arrived at that number. I'll record that position, advance the playhead back to frame 30, and I'll rotate it back 70 degrees and record that keyframe. So now when I scrub the playhead, we got a perfect walk cycle, right? Well, not quite. So, but I have the basic motion established, the basic mechanics of that motion established. I'm going to do the exact same thing for the upper body now and get those arms swinging. So I'll just dig in here and I'm just going to simplify my view. I'm focusing only on the uppers at this point. So my playhead's already at the beginning of time. I'll record the first keyframe, advance the playhead. I'm going to rotate this 70 degrees. Record the keyframe, advance the playhead to the end of time, and rotate it back 70 degrees. Same thing for the right arm. I'll record the first position if I want to be tricky. I'll also record the last position, and then move to the middle, and rotate in the opposite direction 70 degrees, and record the keyframe. And so now, when I play, I get kind of this really stiff shuffle right now, okay? Now, I'll do just a couple of really quick things to add a little bit of character. One of the things that's going to kind of loosen up this animation is going to be bending the knees. And so I'll go back to focus on the legs for a moment. So I'm going to collapse my upper body and forget all about the upper body and focus on the lower legs. Now, the lower legs, they have no keyframes associated with them. Okay? So the idea here is that I want to establish a couple of keyframes that preserve the current position, and I'll kind of tweak these things as I go. But I think that what I'm going to try to do here is that when this leg is fully extended at frame 15, I definitely want that leg straight. Okay, and then again, I want it more or less straight as it comes back and as you're bearing weight down that leg. So I want this knee to bend somewhere, and I think that the place that I want to bend this is not here in the back of time or at the start of time, because your leg is more or less straight when it's in that back position. It's that as it's coming forward, your knee is going to bend to come up off the ground. Okay, and this is where there's some value in getting up and walking around and trying to experiment with with how your body moves and what your legs are doing. And I'll just back this up just a little bit, and I'm going to experiment with just one leg, whatever leg I have selected. And so I'll record the first keyframe. I'll advance this through time, and I know that at frame 15, so I'm really looking at the keyframes that I've already established, I probably want that leg straight at this point, I think. So maybe I'll just mark that keyframe. So basically what I've done is I've just preserved the leg being in a straight position. But if I go somewhere between halfway through, and I'll just stop at frame 7, and I'll bend that knee, let's say let's try 45 or even 50 degrees. I'll mark that keyframe. Let me see what that does for me. Look at that. Okay, it's not perfect, but it gives me a lot more character in the animation. Okay, so in the back position, when the leg is all the way back, the knee is straight. When it's in the very forward position, the knee is straight as well. It's as that knee is coming forward halfway between those two keyframes, either frame 7 or frame 8, I'm going to bend that knee. Now, if I decide I need it bent a little bit more, I could do that. Right now I bent to 50 degrees, but now I'm going to try this. I'm going to repeat the same thing on the right lower leg. So I'll select that leg, and I'm just kind of playing with the playhead in time. So I'm keeping it straight, keeping it straight. I know on frame 15, that leg is already in the back position. It's going to start moving forwards based on the math. It's based on the amount of frames that I have inside the animation, and I cut that animation in half. I know I have keyframes that govern the upper leg based on frame 0, frame 15, and frame 30. So I'll just mark that first keyframe. Now I could go to the end of time and record the keyframe. I know that that's going to be the recipe that I want to follow, but I'll just add roughly 7 frames to this, 7 or 8 frames. So 15 plus 7 is either 22 or 23. And I'll just rotate that 50 degrees is what I use in the other one, so I'll stick with that. Add the keyframe, advance the playhead, and straighten it back out 50 degrees. And I'll record the keyframe. And so now, when I scrub the playhead forward, I get a much more natural motion to the lower legs. I'll just hit play. Okay. There's still a lot of stiffness in the animation, but I'll start to do a few things and experiment with a few things to correct for that. So I'll just, let's see here, go to the move tool. That way I'm not looking at those rotation bands, and I'm really just focusing on the legs at this point, and that looks pretty good for now. Like I said, I'll go back and tweak it. So we'll catch up in the next presentation.